Godzilla Minus One, Animal Well, and The Art of Rally. This is Staying In. I was in Bristol over the weekend.
Why were you in my gaff?
Were you doing the thing that I like to do? Every time I drive safe, I take a picture of the you're passing through Bristol side, and I kind of go, just passing through, every single time. And I always get a little chuckle.
Did you do anything like that?
No, I did what a sensible person would do, which was I took a picture of the Gloucestershire Javelin incinerator.
Yep.
And then wrote a 5-star haiku about how wonderful it.
Yeah, I mean that's
wonderful it is.
That's sensible.
It's a logical thing.
Since Chris isn't here, he won't. I've no idea which episode we talked about the incinerator, but
the Javelin.
The Javelin.
I can't remember.
But the Javelin truly is a remarkable building, and the fact that you're making poetry for it, it should not be shunned or criticised in any way, in my opinion.
No, thank you. I was in Bristol, not to see you, unfortunately, but I was there for my brother-in-law's stag do, and we had a very, very merry time. Did lots of things. Spent 6 hours in chant encounters.
Which one did you go to? Did you go to the one on Gloucester Road?
Oh, Christmas Steps.
Or Christmas? Oh, the classic Christmas Steps one is a
the
banger.
Classic Christmas Steps.
Amazing.
Which is just the best board game cafe / pub that I have ever been to. I was thinking about it a bit today, and I was just like, it just manages to really straddle the line between a place where you can just chill out and play some games, but also a place where if you wanted to, you could get a bit smashed and raucous and generally have a party.
That is an exceptionally thin line.
It is
to straddle. I don't think I've ever seen it where you kind of feel perfectly comfortable in both camps of that.
It's just like I don't know how they pull it off. Part of me thinks it's just the mix of chill trip hop beats and a big 20-sided die on the counter that you pay £4 to roll, and whatever it lands on, you have to do that shot.
Perfect.
It's kind of that that kind of vibe. Meanwhile, someone comes up to your table and says, "Do you want anything? Can I help you play that game?" And you feel very, very well looked after.
It's just glorious. It's just a lovely place, and it's got a bit of the Harry Potter shopness about it, which is that it's at the bottom of a set of nice stairs that foreign people imagine all of Britain looks like, it's like tucked away nicely. And it goes back far, and the clientele are generally just really nice, and the people running it are really nice, and everyone's there for a good time. And if you get slightly too tipsy, like, they'll keep an eye on you, but they're not gonna throw you out onto the cold Christmas steps.
No,
they just steer you away from the dexterity games and
I did, whilst I was in Bristol, I did find my gin cocktail of choice.
Okay. Because I know you've been looking for that.
I'm not a big fan of gin, but we went to a gin bar on a boat, which wasn't the best idea when we were already a couple of pints in.
Mm-hmm.
So we'd arranged to go for this gin cocktail making masterclass. And we stepped into the room where we were having this class. And immediately I was like, right, is the boat leaning or am I?
Yeah.
Because I feel like I've either had too many or we're going over, lads. But it turns out that my cocktail of choice, and I want you, Pete, you might know this already. You both might know this already. You gin drinkers. Apparently, I really love a Dirty Gibson.
I have seen that scrawled on a wall somewhere, but I...
Was it a toilet? Back of a bathroom door?
I don't actually know what is in a Dirty Gibson. Oh, Sam. Oh no, Sam! It's worse than what I thought it was.
But it's very me, though, isn't it?
Give me a clue as to what the makeup of this abomination is.
Well, look,
Pete, it's very me. You've got to admit, isn't it? I'm very on brand.
yeah, it's very right, Dan. You know, Sam's a contrarian.
Okay.
Yeah. So, gin. Now imagine the kind of solid object you would put inside of it.
You mean ice?
No, I wish I meant ice.
What kind of solid object do you put in any drink?
Dan, what do you think a Gibson is?
Is it a golf ball?
Oh, I mean,
you're getting close. You're getting close. It's edible. It's edible.
Gibson. What is an edible thing called a Gibson? I don't know. Burger?
Well,
so it's a thing that refers
a burger,
to...
Dan, it's still a drink. It's not going to be a burger.
The word Gibson, and this might be a clue or completely throw you off, refers to an ad. I don't know if she was like an advertising campaign or just something, but she was known as the Gibson girl. That's where it comes from. And the thing that you would put in the drink reminded the men of the Gibson girl.
Did they?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
Just tell me, because I can't think of anything edible here.
It's 2 small pickled onions.
Oh,
Sam, that's the 1920s when I assume this cocktail was made, and I assume the Gibson girl was advertising onions.
No, she wasn't advertising onions. It was the shape of the onions together.
Can I just ask? Is it presented? Does it come in like a martini glass?
Yes. So it's a martini.
Okay. So
it's
I'm a bit
vermouth
more on board
and
now. Not that I want
gin.
it, but I'm aware of this being a thing.
Yeah. So, so it was a martini. So it's vermouth and gin, but with a bit of olive brine. So that's what makes it dirty. And then some pickled onion in it, which made it a Gibson. So it was a dirty Gibson.
You know what? I'm not really one for kind of the cocktails that are just kind of liquor, so just the alcohol. I like to have a certain type of mixer involved. However, so saying that, so I'm not going to like a Dirty Gibson for that reason. However, that doesn't sound like the worst thing in the world. I don't mind pickled onions.
It wasn't. It was lovely.
That doesn't sound to me like the worst thing in the world. It's not something I would choose, but I wouldn't necessarily choose it. I'd be if I did drink cocktails that were just the alcohol, I would be intrigued by trying that.
Yeah, you'd drink something that tasted like Monster Munch, wouldn't you? Yeah.
I mean, I do like Monster Munch.
Oh, God's sake. Racing games, I love them, and they're one of those like genre. They're one of those genre games that don't often get a lot of critical praise. I feel like they're kind of like FIFA and Call of Duty in that. Well, not even like Call of Duty. I think more like FIFA and those big sports games where racing games don't often get like a load of praise and scrutiny, and I sometimes wonder about why that is, and I think sometimes it might simply be to do with the FIFA-esque problem, which is basically most of these games are trying to do some kind of naturalism or realism or some kind of simulational element. But if it's not simulational, then there's not a lot to critique of like, oh, well, you know, in a racing game, when you talk about a simulation, you could talk about like the level of detail that something goes to. When you talk about, but when you don't have that, when you've got something that is slightly more arcadey, there's not really that much to talk about in that way. It's just like, yeah, it's a racing game. You know what it's like. Accelerate, brake, left and right.
But isn't that one of the reasons why maybe they don't, they're sort of somewhat strangely conceived, because there's this kind of like a two sides of the same coin nature to them. Like there's either some people who really like the simulation of the race, or there's the people who like the really like arcadey nature of it.
Yeah.
And what tends to happen is the games that do well are able to like straddle that line the best, but not many do. So most of them are just really appealing to a very particular audience.
I think that used to be the case, that you often got races that were quite popular that were sort of straddling the line between sim and arcade, right? So like Gran Turismo is like, I would say it's become more simulation-y just simply because of the nature of the technology available to it. But even things like Forza and stuff like that, like they're a far cry from a simulation game, right? Like, and they are they're not necessarily going downhill, certainly in terms of quality, but they're not the big showstoppers anymore. They're not the you don't buy a PlayStation because it's got Gran Turismo necessarily, right? You buy it because it's got Uncharted or Last of Us or whatever. And the arcade side of things is, that's a very different quantity, because you end up with like, you're talking about the same thing. You're talking about driving a car, but you're going down two very separate paths. One is, I want ultra detail, and I want a real sense of grounding in the world. And then the other side, the arcade side, is much more like, I want excitement and thrills, and it almost doesn't matter that, I guess, whether or not it's driving or not. Like, you want something that's fun and exciting, right?
I think that's the kind of the point, and kind of you talk about kind of why perhaps they don't get the respect, perhaps the wrong word, but the kind of respect of other things, because at their core, whether it's Gran Turismo or it's a Need for Speed, at its core, it's racing.
Yeah.
Like, it's not doing anything else. The only thing that does anything else is if you expand it slightly and you bring in kart racing, and that is still racing, but as a whole new element.
You got weapons and stuff like that. Yeah.
Which then does make it a unique kind of idea. So when you have the simulation and the arcadey one, at the end of the day, they're the same thing, in the same way that you've got your FIFA and you used to have Pro Evo, and you have different. In the past, you'd have had more football games, whereas now it's kind of a monopoly. Now it's FIFA or it's EAFC. You have a similar thing there, because you boil it all down and it's the same thing. But how is it presented? How does it feel? All of that stuff becomes, do I buy game A or game B? It's the feel. It's kind of really incidental things that are quite hard to kind of pinpoint.
And I do think that there is the FIFAification of racing games. I think they're getting fewer and fewer and fewer because they're becoming more and more and more expensive to make. Fewer players are actually in the space, as in developers. So like F1, for example, is now over at EA, and if you've got the F1 license, like you're the only open wheel racing game in town, really, because like, that's just that. There's Gran Turismo, which is just a massive brand. There's Forza, which again is just a massive brand. And there's not really a lot of space for another big racing game to kind of come in. Like, you have games like Isle of Man TT, and you have MotoGP, and you have Paris Dakar and gravel and stuff like that, but they're not really taken to that same level of. They're just another racing game, right? They're just seen as that. But I love them. I love racing games, and I feel like there's something really fun about them. And very recently, over the last, I would say 12 to 24 months, like there's been some really interesting pushes in different directions in racing games. And one of them has been a game called Art of Rally, which I finished a couple of days ago now. It's made by the same people who made a game called Absolute Drift, which is a company called Funselektor. And that made waves a fair number of years ago now, because it was a drifting game. It was ultra low poly and felt really smooth, and the drifting felt really good, like really good. And I've been over the last 6-12 months, I've been reading a manga series called Initial D, and I finished it now. It's like 48 books of 300 pages of per book manga. And so I've been really like getting into that. I was like, oh, I really want to go. I remember Funselektor made Absolute Drift. So maybe I'll go back and check that back out again. But I have kind of played it already, and I realized, oh yeah, they made Art of Rally, and I didn't really pay that much attention to it. I think I might have played the beta at one point, and then just kind of went, yeah, it's not for me. So I decided to check out Art of Rally, and it is superb. It takes the same basis of like low poly visual style, and it is deeply, deeply striking in terms of its visual style. So you might, if you've ever watched Rally Cross before, or any of that sort of stuff, Colin McRae and that lot from back in the day, you'll know that it's essentially cars, production cars usually, or close to production cars, bombing it down mud tracks and snow and desert and all that sort of stuff. And then there's like people on the sides of the roads watching very close, right? Really scarily close, right? And the reason I bring this up is the way that they're represented in Art of Rally, which they are, is they're little Thomas Was Alone-esque rectangular polys, right? Little rectangular people that are just on the side of the road, and then as you drive towards them, they get out of the way, like you would if you had a car driving towards you, right? So really striking. It has a bunch of vehicles in it that are wink, wink, nudge, nudge. This isn't really a Toyota Celica. This isn't really a Subaru Impreza, but they totally are, and they have all of the visual colors and styles and stuff like that you recognize. So if you've played something like Sega Rally back in the day, that lovely red and white and green of the Celica, and that sort of slightly sphere-like shape to it is really nicely represented in the game, even though it is low poly. And all of those vehicles that are classics, and it goes back to like the 1970s for its inspiration, and then all the way up to sort of modern day. So you play these different campaigns with lots of different rallies, and the idea is that you're going back in time to like the start of Rally and what it started off with. So the equivalent of Mini Coopers hooning it round Wales, for example, all the way up to modern day, and your Ford Focus RSs and really like high end, still just about production vehicles, but honing it basically. And it sets them on a series of rallies that are across the world, and all of these look really, really different. So you'll be going across parts of Kenya, where there's lots of desert and there's like a gravelly path, and then you might be going to Japan next, where it's in the middle of cherry blossom season, and you're mostly spending time on tarmac, although you will go a little bit off-road as well. And then there's times when you'll go to Finland and you'll be on like ice. And each of these different tracks, for such a low poly, arcadey looking racing game, it's weirdly not simulational, but it feels right. And it feels right in the way that like Absolute Drift felt right. Like, it clearly isn't a simulation, but it's one of these games that has been so finely balanced in terms of its inputs and how you actually move around in the space that you can master it. And this art of idea to it, you get the feeling as you're moving through it, the art of the rally is in the driving, that the driving is the art form that you are displaying in that space, how you are able to gun it across things and take these blind corners that you've never seen before, how you're able to take them at speed is part of that sort of like artistic performance.
You mentioned that you'd completed it at the weekend. What does that mean?
So I finished. So there's a campaign which is 1970s all the way up to modern day. So it's like 4 or 5 different sets of rallies. So you'll have like stages of a rally. So you might have 3 stages and then 2 rallies. So each rally consists of 3 stages, let's say. So you'll have 6 races, and that'll be that one event, and you'll have like 5 or 6 events as part of that decade. So that's the stuff I've completed. I've unlocked a bunch of that stuff in there as well. There is also a free roam mode, which has different locations that you can go to, and you can drive around and do little pickups and all that sort of stuff. In an open world space. I've not finished that bit of the game, but I did finish all of the campaign because I just thought that's the thing I was most interested in. So there is a sense of finality to it, and even once you have
that's good.
once you have completed it, it has generated daily and weekly races where it will give you a car and it will give you a track, and it will say, right, best time, off you go. And there's no mucking around, there's no changing things. It's just, this is what you have, try and get the fastest time. And all of that leaderboard stuff also applies to the campaign and to individual races as well. So you can also you can compete with people around the world based on how fast you can complete certain tracks and laps and all that sort of stuff. So there's lots and lots and lots of stuff to do, even after you've, quote unquote, finished it. And there's some DLC as well. I think they added Australia. I didn't bother playing that, but because I got more than what I wanted out of it. But yeah, it's like 15 hours. It's beautiful, and you come away from it going
what were you playing on?
Steam Deck. Have you got a Steam Deck?
Oh, have you got one of those?
Yeah, I've got one of those.
All right, okay.
Yeah, playing on Steam Deck, and it's obviously one of the criticisms of the Steam Deck is the battery life. This, you do not need to worry about that with this. Like, it is, again, it's efficient. The battery, you'll get 3 or 4 hours of play out of it before you even need to think about plugging it in again. Like, it's nice. It works really, really well. I was playing on Steam specifically, but you can get it on Epic and GOG. You can get it on the consoles, and you can also get it on mobile if you've got a powerful enough device or at least, if you've got an Android 13 and above, I think it is for Google Play, and I think iOS is relatively recent iOS. You can basically get it running, and I haven't played it on those, but I think it would probably work quite nicely on there too.
Well, I've been playing lots of little indie games as well. A couple on my Steam Deck. I recently finished The Last Campfire from Hello Games. Now, I never knew it was a Hello Games thing, but it just was like in between Joe Danger and No Man's Sky, or during the development for No Man's Sky, 3 members of the team of Hello Games basically just split off and just made this little passion project called The Last Campfire. And it's only like 5 hours long. It's super, not simple, but it's basically, if you've ever played something like Captain Toad, like basically that's how it sort of sets out all of its puzzles. It's like you explore this world, and when you find certain points in it, it like transports you into basically what is a puzzle room, and then you've got to like just solve that puzzle, and then you get out of it and you can go on and carry on exploring the world. And the puzzles themselves are tricky, but they're not like too difficult. Like it feels like it's the right level of challenge for just to sit down and just chill out experience. And the story it's telling, my word,
really?
Like it goes to like it is basically over the course of 5 hours explores the concept of, but what if we didn't die?
So the little questions in life.
Yeah. Wow.
So yeah.
Okay.
So it really is a really nice piece of work. And then I started playing Duck Detective.
No, that's on the list.
Which feels like a game where it feels like a game where I get the image of some people thinking about what game they'd like to create, and then one of them says, You know, when a detective says deductions, it almost sounds like deductions. And then from that point on, they've gone on and made a...
By Jove,
we've
got a game.
We've got a game on our hands. So I'm sure we might talk about Duck Detective at another time. But the one I really want to talk about, and it's going to be difficult because I can't really say much about it because of spoilies, is Animal Well. Have you guys heard about the buzz?
Yes,
about
I've
Animal
been wanting
Well?
to play this. I haven't got around to it yet. That's kind of one of the next things on my list.
I keep hearing about this, but I don't know why.
Partly you've been hearing about it because it's done very, very well.
Okay.
Like critically across the board. I think sales-wise, it's done very well. It's free currently if you've got the PS Plus Extra subscription. You can just download it for free and start to play it. It's basically the first game released from Big Mode Publishers, which is Video Game Donkey publishing house.
Oh,
if you watch Video Game Donkey.
Yeah. Okay.
And it's designed just by one guy, Billy Basso, and it's a bit like takes stuff from Tunic and Fez and The Witness. It's a search action platformer, as the kids like to say these days, rather than Metroidvania. And you play as this brown blob, and what you're doing and what your purpose is never ever really explained to you. All you know is that you're in this pixel perfect world, which does stuff with some pixel graphics that I have never seen before in a video game. And again, it's stuff that I don't really want to spoil, but when you see it, I was just like, I have never seen pixel art that good.
Is it like the kind of thing, as you mentioned, Fez, the kind of thing where when Fez turns, like, that's something that you've not seen before, and suddenly you kind of create...
it's not...
I'm not saying it's the same thing, but that element of,
yes,
this is something new with the genre.
Yeah. And as you go through this world and start exploring it, things just become weirder and weirder and stranger, but somehow all the more compelling. Like, you start coming across eggs and you pick up the eggs and you go, right, that was great, I just found a furry egg. And then a few hours later, you find a room with a peacock in it that's got all the eggs you've been finding. And like, all right, okay, so I guess I'm looking for eggs. But then you come across all the usual things. Well, not really all the usual things, but, you know, like in any search action game or in any Metroidvania, eventually you come across new skills and new powers in order to help you explore the world. And what Animal Well does, probably better than really most games I've played in recent times, is teach you how to use the new skills and the new gadgets that you've got in some of the most superb and elegant ways imaginable. Like, there is no dialogue, there is no writing on the screen that says, oh, you've picked up this, press this to use it. Oh, you can also use it this way. All it does is uses environmental design to teach you how to use the things that you are finding in the world. And the level of satisfaction and discovery you feel when playing something like Animal Well is just astounding. And I think it's probably one of the reasons that it's done as well as it has done, because it's not, you know, I think sometimes when people say you're not hand-holded through it, I feel like, you know, it's kind of, they're thinking about hand-holding in a very puerile way.
Yeah.
as if you're a child
Yeah.
and someone needs to like, you know, draw you through an experience. Because Animal World does hold your hand, if we're going to extend the metaphor. It does do it. It does guide you through everything you need to know about how to explore the world, how to interact with it. It's all there. You just got to look for it. And more than any other game that I have played in recent times, the amount of times, you know, you just walk into a room and the first thing I do is just look around, just look at it and just explore and just try and understand what the room is actually telling me as a player in terms of how I can interact with it. And it's so goddamn smart. Apparently there is even a whole ARG level to it, which I am yet to even get underneath it. Apparently it is a multiple layered like experience, and I don't know if I've there yet or if I've missed it or whatever, but apparently there is. It's just one of those bonkers level passion project games, and I don't really want to say much more about it other than I think it's definitely worth all of your time in trying to play it. It's on Switch, it's on PlayStation, it's on Steam.
Yeah, it's definitely one I want to give a go to. You've very much piqued my interest.
Yeah, it'll be great to speak about it in our chat in terms of like how you find it and so I can share a little bit more about what that sense of discovery feels like and sense of like reward of being able to like explore a space. And I think actually what I like about it most is there's no combat in it. There's never any sense of getting stronger per se or attacking bosses. There are bosses in the game, but you never attack them. You only ever best them through really using the environment. And sometimes that's things that always frustrate me in games, like things like Hollow Knight, which I think is a magnificent game. And you know, but what I enjoyed about Hollow Knight more than anything was exploring the world.
Yeah.
And then you'd explore the world and do some really intricate and really interesting platforming. But everything always would end in a boss fight, and I'd be like, well, you know, it always comes down to combat at the end.
Yeah.
Mostly games like this. But Animal World completely circumvents that and goes, right, what if you're defenseless? What if you just have some health? But I think that's just kind of make it so it's not completely disheartening to carry on playing and to exploring. But you've got no way of really defending yourself. You've got no real way of attacking or punishing the world around you. So it's just all about using your wits, which I think is so incredibly smart.
That is cool.
The other thing I've been doing is, and it's a shame that Chris isn't here, and it is only a small thing because we brought it up on the podcast before, but I've been watching The Haunting of Hill House. And can I just share with you now that it is one of the most remarkable pieces of television I've ever watched, and is vying very, very nicely to creep into my top 5.
Wow.
Don't have to say any more than that, but it is.
What's at risk in your top 5?
Oh, good shout. Let's have a little look. I've been thinking about my top 5s lately and how, especially with books, I've not really updated them recently. But let's have a look. Top 5s. Here we go. Top 5 TV. The Wire. That's not going anywhere. Gilmore Girls. The Simpsons, Succession, and How To with John Wilson. Well, I think The Simpsons is straight out there.
Oh, that's a shame.
I'm surprised not to see Better Call Saul in there.
But that's why I need to look at it again. I think Better Call Saul might shove out Succession. But I was watching Haunting of Hill House. And I came to, I think the thing that always frustrates me is, I know you say this a lot, Dan, and sometimes you do, Pete, about how you don't like feeling the way you do when you watch horror. Like, why would you watch horror to feel that way?
Yeah.
And I think Haunting of Hill House has given me a revelation where I think I understand why horror can be really effective as a genre. And just hear it out. This is my TED talk. This is my thesis, right?
It's your turn to talk.
And the turn to talk. And there was a wedding scene in it, and I found myself just being absolutely overcome with emotion. I was like, what is happening to me? I mean, it's not completely out.
Yeah,
I'd be surprised if you weren't. It's a wedding scene. Come on, Sam. It's totally in your wheelhouse.
The man who famously cries at adverts. Yeah, like.
But I mean, it's not like quote unquote Gilmore Girls. Like, it's not a it's a wedding scene in the midst of, you know, people seeing horrible like murders and people being scared in houses and people being threatened and, you know, dealing with all trauma and all this kind of stuff. But the realization I came to was, like, when you watch, take the wedding scene as like an example. When you watch the wedding scene as a drama, the way into the drama is for you to feel like how those people feel, or to connect with them on some kind of level, right? But if you do that as like a drama, it's very, very difficult, because that's something that you may not have experienced before in your life. You may never have felt love like that. You may never have been in that situation. It's very hit and miss about what it will be that's kind of bringing you into the world. Same in like a comedy, like laughter is objective, and you might find it funny, and you might find some jokes funny or some jokes not funny, and how the TV show or the film uses humor can bring you into that situation and make you feel empathetic, or it can push you away. However, what I figured with Haunting of Hill House was I've been just as terrified as all of these characters throughout the last 6 hours. I've been just as scared. I felt every single fright. I've jumped at everything that they've jumped at. I've yelped at everything they've yelped at. I've yelled for them to get out of the house over and over and over again. Like, I have felt that fear. I have felt that chill. I have felt everything that they have been feeling throughout it. So now we've got to this wedding, like, I am completely in there with them. And it was just at that moment that I had that realization that, unlike any emotion, like, that emotion of fear is so intrinsic and instinctual, which I don't think is a word, but you get what I mean. But I feel like it's such a shortcut to empathy and understanding that I was like, well, of course, like, that's the reason why I feel like I'm so attached to this family and how they feel and how they react to things, because I've been feeling and reacting to everything that they have, like everything that they see and everything they do, and how they respond to fear. Like, I've been having exactly the same emotions, and it's just become a really, like, incredible piece of work. So when the characters are, you know, because how the series kind of takes shape is you see them when they're kids, and then you see them with their adults. And not only have I shared in their emotions, both as kids and as adults, but also I can kind of understand how they've got to where they are as adults. I can understand how that fear and how those experiences could make them into the characters that they are today. So the TV series has to do no heavy lifting in terms of, you know, really explaining or overemphasizing or lots of exposition in terms of helping you understand why someone behaves the way they do. Yeah. You just intrinsically understand why that is, because you felt it. You've been there. Yeah. You've had that chill. Like, there's
this phenomenon called Verstehen, I think it comes from sociology, and the idea is to basically to understand. I think it means to walk in one's shoes, or to walk in another's shoes.
Yeah.
And there's like you say, it's fear is one of those really primal instincts, and it is easier to get across, right? It is easier to get into that. And when you start to empathize with the characters, not even necessarily sympathize, but just understand what it is that they're going through, it does make the experiences that they're having more powerful. Because it forces you to think, I could be in that situation. I was listening to a really good lecture series about science fiction and how it works, basically, and from a lecturer. It was like a great courses series, really, really good Audible audiobook series. And one of the things that they were talking about is how science fiction allows us to ask really difficult questions about the world without asking them quite so directly. So things like 1984 and Brave New World and things like that, you can step away from them because they are science fiction. They are fantasies. You know, they're things that you can say, oh, well, this doesn't exist, right? And therefore, I'm not criticizing what's happening now. I'm looking at this thing over here and saying, isn't that really interesting? And if you just so happen to make the inference that what is being talked about here by Orwell might very well be coming up in the 50s, maybe, if we're not careful, then it allows it almost like it's like the opposite of the Twitter thread, right? Where the Twitter thread is like, hey everybody, I'm going to tell you what I think, and it's just going to be super blunt and super like very on the nose. This is exactly what it is. Very like hammering people over the head with some belief about something. With science fiction, and I think with horror, you're still able to have those conversations about really difficult subjects that you might be the context of that Twitter thread, but you're able to do it in a way that doesn't hammer it over people's heads, and it's almost like a safer space to discuss those things. So things like things like Heinlein, when he was writing things like Starship Troopers, for example, that is a very difficult book to read in a lot of ways, because there's a lot of stuff in there where you're like, where he's basically asking a question about what service is and who should belong in a society. And that is a really like horrible set of ideas that it might be beneficial to exclude certain people from a society. If you were to put that into a philosophy book, that's real, like you're going to end up on probably some banned lists, right? But when you write a science fictional work about it, you can ask the question. You can say, here's this other society, and I'm going to take it to its logical extreme. And I think horror does that same thing, but it's of a more personal nature. I think the reason that, and I can't remember, he used to be, he's a comedy writer. He does horror movies now.
Jordan Peele.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting thing about Peele's work, and I think the reason people have such a strong reaction to it, is that it does say extremely personal things. And it does so by making you go, scared? Yep. Now you can feel what it's like to some small degree to be in that space and in that position.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the beauties of horror. It allows you to, again, it's why I like Silent Hill 2. It allows you to explore the idea of what if you were, if you were in the horrible situation that James Sunderland finds himself in. It allows you to, rather than just the sort of hack slash, what if you were being chased and murdered? That's not very exciting, right? And I think that's not the kind of horror that we like in general or find interesting in some way. I think the really interesting horror is the stuff that says something personal without actually openly discussing that personal thing.
What kind of experience do you guys have with Godzilla? Have you what?
Oh.
I don't mean in terms of like, have you ever looked outside as he stomps on by? What I mean is like, how?
All right.
Have you what level of experience do you have in the movies of what you've seen?
So we obviously have to talk about the classic. I mean, we all bought the soundtrack. Jamiroquai on one side, the artist who will forever be forgotten on the other side.
Late 90s, early 2000s? Is that the Godzilla?
Yeah,
that sort of thing?
Godzilla and Matthew Broderick, the obvious pairing.
The obvious pairing. Saw it in the cinema. There was a Godzilla game on the PlayStation 2 or maybe Dreamcast. And there was also one by SNK called King of the Monsters, which was wicked. That was actually a really good game. And then movies-wise, I think I've seen like 10 minutes of the very first one, like about 5 or 10 minutes of it, and went, this looks boring, and didn't really go much further with it. I've been it seems like one of those... Godzilla's always struck me as one of those IP where it's like The Mummy. It's like, stop trying to make it happen. It's not... No one not enough people care, but clearly people do because it keeps coming back.
Yeah, I've seen so the 1998 Roland Emmerich classic, and then I've also seen the Gareth Edwards one, Godzilla, and then I've also seen the TV show, the Monarch. Yeah, I've also seen that, which is all right.
So yeah, I've not gone into Monarch yet. So that's, you got roughly around the same kind of experience with Godzilla as I have. I've only ever really seen, obviously saw the 90s film. I thought that was rubbish at the time. It was just they put a T-Rex in New York and that was basically it. And I watched the Gareth Edwards one, and I think I've seen bits of maybe like some of the Godzilla versus Kong stuff and stuff like that, all these kind of more Western ones. And so obviously there is this big long history of the kind of Godzilla movies in Japan, obviously it being a whole thing. And I've never had a massive interest in it, because like what I think of as Godzilla, I think of the 90s film, I think of a big monster film, and I'm not really that interested in that. But I've also always known that yes, it's about that, but Godzilla was always a metaphor.
Yes.
It wasn't about that thing. That was always a metaphor for nuclear war.
The first one was...
But over time, I mean, there's been, I think it was just the 70th, last year was the 70th anniversary of kind of the first Godzilla film. And a film came out then, which has just come out on Netflix, called Godzilla Minus One, which is the 37th Godzilla film. And it got really great reviews when it came out, and it just landed on Netflix like at the time recording it literally a few days ago, and I'd been looking for it to appear on it because I did want to watch it because it was getting some great reviews, and literally I was just scanning through it, it popped up on a feed I was looking at, like, oh, it's landed today, and I was like, oh, brilliant, I'll watch it. So I watched kind of Godzilla Minus One, not really knowing what to expect, and the title Minus One means that the film is set in kind of the aftermath of the Second World War, and so Godzilla Minus One implies that at the end of the Second World War, Japan was at its lowest ebb. Following that, and it's at that point that Godzilla attacks, which takes it even further lower. So it becomes minus one. It goes even worse than its lowest ebb. That's what that kind of the title means. Kind of at first, I just kind of thought it was one of those things where lost in translation. It doesn't really make sense because it's been lost. But actually, no, that is the kind of the reasoning behind that. So it's a story about Godzilla, but it's also not a story about Godzilla. All the films I've seen so far, whether it's the 90s film, the Gareth Edwards film, all that stuff, those are monster movies. That is a film about a monster, and then things happen around the monster. In Godzilla Minus One, and as I say, I've not watched any other ones. I'm now intrigued to watch more, but I've not watched any of the other ones. So I may be saying things that is kind of very clear in the back catalogue, but this is a story that has Godzilla in it, but it's not a monster movie. In my mind anyway, it's not a monster movie. To me, this is a film about PTSD. This is a film about kind of survivor guilt. So the lead character in it, the lead character called Shikishima, is a kamikaze pilot in the Second World War. But at the time when he's going on his mission, he diverts away from his mission and lands on a small island designed for kind of repairing the planes. And he lands there and says, "There's a problem with my plane. I can't fly." And the guys there look into it and say, "There's nothing wrong with this. We know what you've done. You're a coward. How could you do this? This was your duty." And when he returns home, people obviously know that he was one of these pilots, and so the experiences he has at home, he goes home and it's completely like, he goes to his house and there's barely a frame to the house, like there's nothing left. And he sees people and like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you're back." And then they realize he abandoned basically the mission, and so he's ostracized for that. And so he's constantly dealing with this whole idea of post-traumatic stress. He's dealing with this survivor guilt of he should have died but he didn't, and what does that mean, and trying to manage that in a world that is kind of attacking him in that sense. Also in a world that's trying to rebuild itself. He doesn't have family anymore, so he meets someone who has found a baby that has been abandoned and takes it in as her own, and so he then helps kind of trying to raise that, but also never wanting to actually make a connection with them because he has this feeling of, I don't deserve anything. And so on top of this, like the fact that I'm talking about all of this and I'm not talking about Godzilla tells you what kind of film this is, because obviously it follows the whole idea of the kind of the bombs being dropped by the kind of in Hiroshima, and then it also looks at some of the nuclear testing in the ocean, and that's where kind of the idea of the Godzilla comes in, and it's very clear that obviously that's what they're not saying he's just appeared. That's why he is kind of the size that he is. And then there are attacks that he does across, whether it's boats in the ocean, because he gets a job going out into the ocean to collect kind of mines. So it's a very dangerous job, but he can get paid a lot of money for it. And it's in that they have their first experience with Godzilla, and then it kind of builds, and he does attack. But although you do see all the destruction, it's interesting that because when you look at the Gareth Edwards film, I remember a lot of that being around the fact that you don't actually see much of Godzilla in that film. Yeah. There's a very much a sense of, we're going to keep him in shadow. We're not going to show it. We're not going to have all that. He is front and center with this film. There's no denying that. He's walking through the city, destroying towns and all that stuff. There's no element of humanizing Godzilla in any way. There's no kind of way to make him the good guy in anything. He is just this wrecking force. And as you're watching it, you're realizing that actually he's not this wrecking. He's not a monster. He is war, basically. He is a personification of what war is and how people then having to deal with that. And it was fascinating to me, knowing Godzilla as I do, as the T-Rex that runs around New York, or the impressive Godzilla who kills Bryan Cranston and has to be defeated by Aaron Taylor Johnson. Like, these are kind of the more westernized things. And then he starts fighting King Kong. These are the things that I know. And so to have it completely come around to actually be a character study, and not a character study of Godzilla, but what does Godzilla represent, was fascinating to me. And like, obviously I was going into it knowing it was going to be good. And there was one, I think a few years earlier, called Shin Godzilla, which I think is the next one I'll probably watch, because that was another one that was quite widely lauded. It won an Oscar for visual effects. It was just a really kind of fantastic film, and I kind of highly recommend it to you both.
Again, another great example of sci-fi using metaphor, right? Like it sounds like that. Like that's
it's the best thing that Monarch also explores until it goes completely off the rails later on in the series. Spoilers. But Monarch explores both the attitude of the nations in trying to understand what Godzilla is, but it also explores how Japan specifically changes in response to Godzilla attacks, which is really interesting because it's set across two time frames: the past and the present. So you have one which is, a nation wrapped up in, because Godzilla came out of that fear of the Cold War, right? It was an allegory about, the danger of nuclear weapons. I'm probably completely wrong about that, but anyway.
No, that's kind of one of the areas I think over history of all these things that is a common theme, and obviously he becomes the gargantuan monster that he is as a result of nuclear testing and nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And so Monarch explores that same sort of similar idea. It's like in the wake of, all these nuclear tests are actually not nuclear tests. They are ways of trying to attract and study what Godzilla was and understand, what this creature was. And then you see Japan in kind of the modern times, and there's like, air raid shelters set up, sirens that go off when there's a Godzilla attack. There's missiles over bridges, over the motorways, all set up, ready for an attack like that. And it's just, that exploration of a country living in perpetual fear of what is outside of it and what is unknown. And yeah, I think it's amazing how conceptually there has always been something very, very interesting in the monster that is Godzilla. And also what is quite interesting is how whenever it's told from the Japanese side of things, either a Japanese writer or director, it tends to be a lot more interesting than quote unquote the 1998 American version, which was Godzilla Size Does Matter, which was the tagline.
Who knew?
Like it's just like, I think you've got one side there who really understand what Godzilla stands for, not what Godzilla stands on. And that's the smartest thing I'll ever say in all my life, and I'm going to drop the mic and walk away.
Oh my god, this is so good. Alright, okay. Right.
So hang on, what's that? They also released a version in black and white called Godzilla Minus One / minus color.
Amazing. Okay.
Sorry.
So, right. So the Japanese version of Godzilla and the American version of Godzilla, very different, went down different paths. Okay. But, let's play a game. It's called Real Name of a Godzilla Movie or Fake Name of a Godzilla Movie, and I'm going to read out. I'm going to read out some names of Godzilla movies, and all I want to hear is real or fake.
Okay.
This sounds simple enough.
Godzilla Raids Again.
Raid or ride?
Raids. Godzilla Raids Again.
Reads again.
Godzilla Raids Again.
Real.
Yeah, real.
It is real. Ebirah Horror of the Deep.
That feels real.
It is real. Destroy All Monsters.
That real.
Yeah, I feel it's real.
It is real. All Monsters Attack.
That's real.
That is real.
I think the game is just, they're all real.
That is real. And finally, let's go with Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah, giant monsters all-out attack.
That's real.
Yeah, it is real. Well done. You've successfully passed.
We foiled your plan.
Yeah, incredible.
Well, if you'd like to suggest a monster movie marathon that we could take part in, then do let us know. stayinginpod@gmail.com. You can hit us up on Instagram at stayinginpod, on any social media platform really, but really Instagram is a place to be. We've also, what other things we've got going on? Chris also usually takes a little selection of something that we've talked about and will add it to one of our Spotify playlists. So if something that we've talked about has a soundtrack,
from Godzilla Minus One, I think.
Yeah, and Animal Well, definitely want. Animal Well's got a superb soundtrack to it, so expect a couple of those being added in the next few weeks if you are a fan of the Spotify playlists that we have put together. I say we, just Chris did it off his own back. If you'd ever like to just see a list of stuff that we've talked about in the past, feel free to go to our Board Game Geek and Steam curated pages, where we've just got a list of all the board games and all the video games we've ever spoken about, links back to the show that they were discussed on, and away you go. And I guess this is a good time if you're sort of, want to have a bit of a deep dive into lots of things that we've talked about, then why not listen to our 200th episode, which is out now, in which we rank the next top 10 best things worth staying in for. So that's out for your enjoyment. If you're listening to this on day of release, it's Father's Day tomorrow, so
if you're celebrating,
need a present. If you need a present idea, there will be definitely something within there.
Yeah,
100%.
Loads of good stuff in there. Just say, oh look, and some of it's digital, so you say, oh, if you've forgotten, you can just
then
point them in that direction.
Please. And that's it. Right. As long as he's not attacking, we'll see you on the beach.